Hello and welcome to another episode of the CrossFit Harrow podcast, episode number 73. Today we have Matt Gompel. Matt, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
First question, as always, goes out to everyone, is why CrossFit Harrow?
Oh, why CrossFit Harrow?
Be nice.
Be nice. Yeah, it's a weird one actually. So I have always played team sports.
Okay.
My whole life. That's always what I've done for exercise. Bit of football, a lot of rugby. Did that all the way through uni, and then moved to working in schools and just found that suddenly team sports just weren't compatible with my life anymore. I didn't have the time to train at the sort of prescriptive times that I needed to train. I also didn't have time on the weekends. And I sort of juggled trying to find what the right thing was for me to do, what the right sort of sporting environment was. I wanted something that was flexible enough around the way that I worked, but also something that probably captured some of the sort of team building and sort of camaraderie that team sports had always held for me, something that motivated me to get up in the morning and exercise, something that pushed me through difficult spots when I was sort of fatigued or when it was the middle of winter, I didn't really want to get up. And so CrossFit seemed like a good fit basically. Didn't really know much about it. And then my neighbor came down for a series of classes, like a sort of on-ramp class. Didn't end up working out for him actually. He didn't really have the time to stick with it.
I'm not sure if I know who your neighbour was.
A guy called Dave. Dave Morgan. Came down for a full set. Said I found this really good gym. We were living next door to each other at the time. Or we'd be living.
What a small world! I never knew that.
Yeah, well,
he went to Belgium. I think he went to Belgium just before we went into lockdown for a holiday, and then came back. And
so we were both. I mean, we lived. It was a funny one actually because we'd lived next door to each other for the best part of 4 years, and just both were sort of never really around that much outside of work really. So he and then obviously the lockdown hit. The first lockdown hit, and then you weren't allowed to leave your house, and we shared, gardens sort of backed on shared space, and so spent a lot of time hanging out there, exercising there. And then he was looking for a gym, came down here, didn't end up fitting, I don't think, with his time frame.
It's amazing how fitness brings people together. That's one thing that I really, really like about, not necessarily just, I think CrossFit amplifies that, but just fitness in general does that. So you said team sports. So sports has always been a big part of your life and childhood and adulthood and stuff. So you mentioned rugby and football. These were just recreational, just for you to take joy. Was it competitive? How did that turn out?
Yeah, I thought I was pretty competitive. I don't think anyone else would have thought I was playing that particularly competitive standard. To be honest, it was like, I'm one of five, so I'm the eldest of five. So my mum had 4 boys. Wow. And my sister played as well. Didn't play rugby actually. She swam. But so for her, it started off just being a way of what the hell am I going to do with all these kids on the weekend? Let's get them all out of the house and tire them out. So me and my brothers played a lot of rugby particularly, football when we were younger, and then rugby when we were sort of secondary school onwards.
Yeah, I think boys tend to be either football or rugby. They might do like a bit of both for a little while, but then they choose what one they prefer.
Yeah, I think so. I always wish I chose football now. It's a much easier sport to play when you're a bit knackered. But so yeah, it wasn't. My brother played professionally, so I'd sort of.
Is this rugby or football?
He played rugby professionally, so through him, probably one of the reasons I ended up in CrossFit maybe was I'd seen him do a lot of things, a lot of Olympic lifting, a lot of gymnastics. Through the sort of various training he had, he was exposed to a lot of that. Yeah. Very relevant, yeah. And so I sort of had an inkling of what I was getting myself into. I don't think I would have found it as easy to come down if I hadn't had an inkling. I'd trained with him a lot, gone to the gym with him a lot, but my form obviously wasn't anywhere near where it needed to be. But I felt confident to give that sort of thing a go. I'd sort of seen it before.
How did you find the transition from like doing a lot of team sports to then, obviously you are in a group environment, but you're working a lot individually? How did you, was that something that you found easy? Was that something that you struggled with?
I think it's just the change in focus is probably just, I was probably always, in a team sport, you're always moving, or I was always moving. So I was always satisfied with sort of 70 or 80% there of a movement or a skill, because
There would be others.
Fitness was functional, right? And there were always others, and you're always moving on to the next thing. And I think it took me a while to realise actually I wasn't really going to make as many improvements unless I was a little bit less satisfied with the picture, with the picture as a whole, and got a bit more into the individual movements and parts. And that was quite a transition. And I still find that difficult. Things like warm-ups I really struggle with. Warm-ups now are really important to making sure I can actually do the exercise as well. Whereas I still struggle with that feeling in team sports where they always felt, especially when I was playing them when I was younger, that they were a bit of a prelude to getting onto the main thing. So I think that the focus on like my individual process and actually about like being fastidious about small things is something that's was quite difficult to transition to. Yeah.
Did you say that you'd been a member of gyms in the past?
Yeah.
Okay, and that obviously you found. Well, I would assume that, but by choosing obviously CrossFit the method, that was no longer serving a purpose or not as enjoyable.
I think it's
because it could be a bit of both.
Yeah.
For some people, they tend to. In my experience, they tend to either run out of options, they get bored of their training, or it just no longer serves their purpose.
Well, I think it's probably a bit of both. I think that I didn't have a purpose when I was going to gyms, and I think I hadn't really realised that for quite a while. So my gym training when I'd been doing team sports was always functional. It was always to aid performance in X. And even if that was just a rough goal when I was going with mates, and we were really just going off our sort of shared wisdom, which there wasn't very much of, to be honest, then at least there was a function to training. I trained with people for a purpose to get better at, to get faster, to get stronger. And so there was a purpose to it. And then I think I had this sort of aimless period when I stopped playing team sports where I would go to the gym, but I wasn't really going to the gym for a specific purpose. And then, so I think, talking about it from the other side, then motivation, I was just quite bad. I didn't really know. I was going because I knew I had to go, because I had to exercise, because I've always exercised. Yeah. But I didn't really know why I was going. I wasn't doing it for a reason.
And people often find that, I think that's how it often turns out to people, is they don't realise or understand why they're going. It turns into a bit of a chore, and that's also they stop enjoying, because they're like, oh, well, I've always done fitness, like you said, so I'm always going to have to go, kind of thing. But it's very interesting to see how people make that transition from training in that environment to recognising what they want from training, to be like, right, now I want to go and get that. Career-wise, education.
Yeah.
Always wanted to do it?
No. Okay. Thought I'd never do it. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I sort of fell into it, really.
Everyone says they fall into their job. It's very interesting. The view of falling at. There must have been, because this is I think out of the podcast, the amount that we've done, I think quite a high number have said, I've fallen into it. What does that mean?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Well, I mean, I did it to sort of, so I'm a teacher. I teach history and religious studies, or philosophy mainly.
Great subjects.
Yeah. It's fun. I love it. Which is funny when fall into it is probably the wrong word. I probably never really left education for a particularly long time. I sort of finished my degree. I did a few different jobs in the year I finished my degree. I worked in a pub, which I loved actually. Worked as a GP receptionist, which I didn't love as much. And then that's quite a hard job. That's a tough job. I got some stories about that. That's a tough job.
They sometimes I feel like, I mean, not to take any credit away from their job role, but I sometimes think that they just are very straight cut, no more, like they won't go past, in my experience anyway, they won't go past any more than they need to do. Can I get an appointment? No. Okay.
Yeah.
When can I get an appointment? Not next week. Not this week. Next week. Okay, so when? When are you free?
Yeah, I think my experience of that is just looking at basically a broken computer system, and probably relatively a broken appointment system as well. Just an endless number of people who wanted an appointment, and you just looking at 3 weeks of there being nothing, and then squeezing someone in for 20 minutes in 3 weeks' time. It was not. Yeah, they do. It was not a fun job.
They don't get the credit they deserve though, but they must get some abuse, I would imagine. Not like physical. Yeah. I mean, like verbally, like people frustration, just getting really fucking annoyed that they can't get an appointment, basically.
Yeah, that was a tough job. I mean, some of the things that and also people coming in with things that they really needed right now. That was a tough job. I did that for a few months, copped a fair amount of abuse. probably more abuse doing that than I would in a classroom. And then I did a job as a sort of supply teacher, sort of cover supervisor.
Okay.
So going into classes where teachers were off sick and just dealing with the cover work, and that was a pretty fun introduction to teaching. You just dealt with whatever.
Was that something that you wanted? Is that something you applied for? You saw an opportunity, you thought, I'm going to give this a go.
Yeah, to be honest, it had a good rate of hourly pay, and it was in a school that I'd sort of been to as a kid, and I saw the job come up, and someone nudged me in the right direction. I thought, yeah, I'll do that. So I did that for 6 months. I went back to university to do a master's degree, and
what was your master's in?
In sociology, so sociology of religion. So obviously that didn't prepare me perfectly for the job market necessarily, and then but it was amazing, and I thought, I'm all set to go and do a PhD. I'd love to do that, but didn't have the funding in place and the proposals in place that I needed. So jumped into essentially a graduate teacher program. Thought, I'll do this for a year, maybe 2. And then maybe I'll go back and do that PhD, and then I've never left. So I've been teaching ever since. So, you could say maybe I've never really left education. So maybe I didn't really fall into it. Maybe I just didn't fall out of it. But So
what was the why sociology? Why was that something that you wanted to study?
Well, I think just always been really interested in the ways. It was a bit of sociology and a bit of anthropology, to be fair, but it just really interested in the ways that sort of peoples and societies interact, especially in relation to religion. So that was something that I'd done some work in before my undergraduate degree, and sort of looking at what motivates people, why they do particular things, why people come together in shared spaces and share certain identities, and how those are created and sustained over periods of time. I just always found those questions really interesting. And I suppose
you answer any of them?
No, I can't answer anything. But I can ask some really good questions some of the time. But I think I just never found a point with those questions where I wanted to stop. I wanted to keep asking more, and I could probably, if we had more time, I could probably give some answers. And I think, if not to, one thing I would say, there's a lot of similarities between the ways people bind together in a sort of religious space and the way people bind together in a sort of in a workout space. There's that sort of there's something
belief system.
Yeah, there's just something incredibly powerful about that shared experience and the pain and the sort of catharsis that comes from it to a certain degree, and also the sort of shared elation when that experience, when you successfully complete that experience, right? So. I think that's what always interests me about the sociology. What's the social function of particular, beliefs that people have. What brings people together, what keeps them together, what keeps them coming back, right? And I think there'd be a great sociology to be done on CrossFit. Brilliant. I'm sure someone's already done it, but there'd be some brilliant work to be done on.
There are rumours that people say that CrossFit is a cult. It is definitely not a cult, but I think it's an environment that brings people together through a shared passion of fitness. Is probably the best explanation I can give. And like you said, the feelings that people experience, they want to share. And after a workout, like most of the time out of a workout, you feel fucking pretty good.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe someone has. I'm not sure.
Maybe I'll do it eventually.
Yeah. That's something for you too. You've got down the teaching with the range and the range of charitable initiatives. What are those? What do you do?
Yeah, one of the things I do through my school is we run a range of charitable initiatives, but one of the ones that I've been working on more recently, which might be interesting to talk about, is providing tutoring. But specifically providing tutoring for children in care. So this was something that emerged out of the first lockdown, actually, that when schools moved online, there were lots of children in the care system who didn't have particularly good access to devices, and also weren't necessarily best placed to engage in all-class learning, because part of being a care experienced young person is that you've probably had quite a lot of educational disruption. So one of the initiatives that I've been working on more recently, sort of alongside teaching, we've been setting up a program of online tutoring to provide sort of one-to-one academic support for children in care. This is a bit of a plug, obviously, partly because we've got a lot of teachers in the gym. So if anyone, if that's something that anyone would be interested in working on, then that would be then seek me out.
How do children who need it? How do the parents and how do they find that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's basically, it runs through what's called the virtual school network. So virtual school networks are basically educational organisations within each local authority. So we work with Harrow, Barnet, Ealing and Brent. Okay. And they provide young people who need sort of educational support. They put them on a sort of waiting list, and we pair teachers across the full age range. So Key Stage 1 up to 18, so about 7 up to 18.
Do you
we
find
then pair the teachers with them to work with them.
Do you find the numbers are bigger in certain boroughs?
Sadly, to be honest, what we find is that there are a really large number of young people in each borough, and especially more than we currently have capacity to work with, probably. And that's especially because children who are in the care of a local authority often move around quite a lot between care placements, and some of them might even move quite far afield. So their responsibility for their education might sit with, say, Harrow, because Harrow has held that responsibility for a period of time, but they might move to, say, as far away as Bristol or further afield. So that's been quite a cool thing about working online. We've essentially created a network of teachers who can do that remotely. So we're supporting children in various different parts of the country.
So you get teachers on board. They are then paired up with tutees. Does this fund some of their devices or technology that they may not have access to, or do they then go to a resource centre or something like that?
Either or, yeah. So there's provision to make sure that those young people have the devices that they need, but then also this is mainly about extra academic support, so targeted one-to-one academic support outside of their schooling. Because often, if you've moved around that much in your education, what you'll probably have is quite big gaps. You move from a school that covered this topic first, and then you're in this school that does it last, or the vice versa. So you maybe miss it twice, or you do it twice, but you don't do something else, right? So this is designed to sort of help those young people with gaps in their education. And yeah, we sort of bring the teachers and we tend to work with schools, actually. So we tend to take a few teachers from a school. We make sure the teachers in the schools have the necessary checks. We train them in the technology in working with the young people, and then they provide some really amazing academic support. Wow. So that's what's been keeping me busy in the lockdowns, basically.
Wow. I know you said that you obviously go for a range of age groups, but is there like a particular age bracket that is like you have those numbers are high because they need that support?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of need through the full age range. I think often where it's most impactful is in primary school. Even by leaving primary school, you've got a lot of young people who are sort of children looked after who might be a year or two behind their peer group in terms of reading age, and those gaps basically compound as young people get older, right? The more, if you're missing some substantive concepts in your education at the age of 10, then you're not going to, that just gets worse and worse. Not always, but often it can just, compound as you go up through the age range. So we're trying to do more this year to focus on the sort of primary age group, to work with more children at a sort of primary phase to help them catch up, basically, and give those young people the start in life that they deserve.
Yeah, I mean, you said that it came through the lockdown. Was this something that came organically through the lockdown? Like it was kind of like a red flag that people noticed that there aren't enough people getting this support? Or was it something that teachers came together and said, "Oh, actually, why don't we do this to help support more?"
Yeah, it's something we've been running a couple of programs on the school site where young people would come and have a sort of homework club where they do an hour of homework and then they go do an hour of fitness or an hour of pottery or some sort of enrichment on a Thursday afternoon. And it was really just talking to the young people who were working on those programs and hearing them, talk about the fact that either they didn't have the support or the technology they needed to access learning, or that they were particularly struggling to access learning online where some of their peers might not, and that that was causing them to slip behind in their learning. And it started off as a spontaneous response in that way, because we had teachers who were keen to help, who had time, and we had young people who needed help. But what we've since realised is that there's no reason we shouldn't be doing this all the time with more and more teachers in the sort of Harrow, Barnet, Ealing sort of area, Brent area, because
to add to their wheelhouse, the kids' wheelhouse.
Yeah, absolutely, and to give them, just a bit more support, a bit of an extra push, and to have someone there who, basically, an hour a week is just interested in them and what they've learned and how they've done, and in pushing them on. And we're sort of growing that and supplementing that as well with sort of other forms of enrichment, some sport, some sort of music, and sort of other sorts of enrichment, basically. But fundamentally, just actually, and I think it's topical, right? It's become topical as well, to talk about this idea of leveling up, in practice or in reality. But the idea that there are people that have been sort of left behind has become particularly apparent since COVID. And I think more and more people are realising actually the disparities that we probably haven't seen in the past as we go about our really busy day-to-day lives.
Well, I was actually going to ask you that as a teacher, your biggest barrier to learning, but that sounds like that could be one of them. As in kids not having the opportunity to, they're falling behind. Is that would be one of the barriers to learning or getting grades or whatever it might be? Do you find that that's very common?
Yeah, I mean, I work in a school environment that's relatively privileged, very privileged in that sense. And I think, there's a lot about barriers to learning that are built into people's context, their home environment, their own personal context, where they've come from, what they've had to work through to access education. And I don't think we spend enough time thinking about what people have had to work through to access education. Where's their start point? What are they? And I think that's probably what the in terms of the barriers to learning, the sort of serious barriers to learning, that we're talking about here. Then those are. Also just access to learning. How much time have you actually spent learning? How much time have you spent in the classroom? How much of that time has been uninterrupted? And I think that's one of the obvious ones we've seen in COVID, right? Where we've seen massive educational disruption to sort of all fields of our life.
How much of an impact do you think that's going to have? Not necessarily where.
Yeah. How much of an impact? I mean, it's going to be the big thing I would say is that we just probably won't know for a while, actually, which is not really a cop out, but it's actually very difficult initially to know how much of an impact it's had. And the big problem with it as well, I think, is it's going to be very patchy, right? It's had virtually no impact on some kids, and it's had a huge impact on others. And sadly, it looks already like it's had a disproportionately large impact on the disadvantaged or those who've already had an impact on their education, and a relatively benign impact on those who are already making good educational progress. But it will definitely have a significant impact, and it's going to be interesting to see how we account for that going forward, I think.
And as a teacher, obviously, generally you get quite a good time off. What do you do in your time off? How do you? So I would imagine I've done a teaching one myself, and it is quite difficult. It can be. So what do you do to take your mind off teaching and off lesson planning and off reports and students and their learning and their development? What do you do?
Well, I have a line, and I come to CrossFit later in the day. No. Well, one thing I do is all the stuff I would like to do more that I don't have time for. So I think I try and eat better. I try and meal plan better. I try and try new things to bring into my diet, or try new foods. I used to travel a lot. Haven't been able to do that.
Where are the places that you visited?
Where have I been in the last couple of years? One of the things I've tried to do with teaching holidays, and I think this is a sort of pretty unique privilege, is I've tried to go to one place for a lot longer.
Okay.
And I've tried to go where I know someone or I've met someone. So one of the best things I did was I had a friend who was starting, it was a stroke of luck actually, got fired from his job. And he was starting with a new company in a year's time. And he's Nigerian, British Nigerian, and one of my best friends from school, he then got a job with a company he was starting with in Nigeria. So he'd been living out there for 6 months, reconnecting with extended family, and we went out to stay with him for 4 weeks. So Nigeria I did recently. Canada, I had a friend similarly who went to do a PhD in Canada, so I went to see, he was in Vancouver, so I went to see him in Canada for 4 weeks. And those are the two most recent ones I've done before the pandemic hit. And just the idea of going somewhere for an extended period of time, living relatively cheaply with someone you know, and actually taking the time to do it properly rather than sort of rushing.
I don't often meet people that have been to Nigeria. To Canada, yes, but not, what was Nigeria like? Amazing,
brilliant. Really interesting country. Very warm, very friendly, very welcoming. We mainly stayed in sort of near towns, cities near and around Lagos. So Lagos, Ibadan, Abeokuta. It was fantastic. It's somewhere I never would have been able to go. It wouldn't have necessarily been set up for tourism in the same way. But as we were there, we sort of just seamlessly jumped into what he was doing at the time. We went to the wedding of some family friends. We saw a lot of the nightlife. We saw.
Is there a big nightlife there?
Yeah, Lagos has a pretty big nightlife. We saw some amazing music at a place called Fela Kuti's Shrine. Shrine to Fela Kuti for a weekend, which was pretty epic. It's pre-pandemic, so I'm sort of trying to remember where. It's a long time ago, isn't it? It's 18 months, 2 years. But yeah, I think teaching holiday, what do I do to switch off? It just gives me the opportunity to do things in a sort of in a depth of time that
as opposed to weeks away.
Yeah, weeks away, and I think it takes the pressure off a little bit. I know friends who go away and they say, "Well, I'm going to go here and I need to go somewhere where the weather's going to be good, and I know I'm going to get good food, and I know I'm going to get to do good things because I've got a week and that's it." And
very rushed.
Yeah, and school is intense, but there's a sort of the slowness, the ability to get into that slowness to basically change rhythm in a really substantive way, and to do things in depth. And not feel like you're rushing is really important to me, and it is a lifestyle choice.
Yeah, of course. And what are the countries that you are wanting to go? What's on the list to go to? Is it a long list?
Well, it's really hard, isn't it? Because all of the thinking at the moment is conditioned about where could you get to.
Well, yeah, I guess so, yeah.
But so I'm sort of trying to get out of that mindset and get more.
Well, I think that changes.
Be more aspirational.
Yeah, I mean that changes. I think now every 3 weeks, so you might want to go somewhere and then.
Yeah.
Can't go. But if no barriers, no restrictions, no nothing, where top two or
Australia will be next.
Yeah.
I think Australia will be next. Got some really good friends who've just emigrated back to Australia. So Australia will be next, I think. It's going to take some saving, but
yeah. I've not been to
next.
Australia. It's on my list, but everyone I've ever spoke to that has been to Australia says absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. You mentioned that in your obviously being a teacher with that time about eating how you want to eat, healthy and everything else. Before we came on, obviously I said to you of how much weight you had lost, and that I think that started. Was it January? Started or?
It was. Yeah, January.
So I remember we ran that nutrition challenge, which we run now. We continuously run, and you said to me, "I really need to do this," and you did. And at the time, I think in that month, it was down about 3 to 7 kilos. Is that right? In that 30 days, but you've continued that. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Well. it was something I just really needed to do. I think the challenge. Well, there's a sort of challenge everyone goes through, isn't there? Where you do a lot, especially doing something like a lot of team sport or a lot of sport, where you basically exercise as much as you want, you eat whatever you want, and it basically balances out. And then there's
so you think,
or so I thought, and maybe that was a metabolism thing that I was just basically getting away with it. But then there was a sort of harsh reality of working life where I basically couldn't do that anymore. You
adopt naturally a sedentary lifestyle.
Yeah.
Without wanting to.
Yeah.
Through particular work things, events, everything else.
Yeah, and I think for me it was, my job wasn't even particularly sedentary. I was on my feet a lot of the time, most of the day, to be honest. But it was more just the fact that food was very functional, and it was starting to have an impact, probably not just on my training, but also on the way that I worked. In terms of everything was sort of grab and go. Let's eat and then go on to the next thing, and sort of felt a bit out of my control. And I couldn't train as well, I don't think really. And I don't think the lockdowns really helped that either as much as I thought they would. I thought, the lockdowns would give you more control, but actually it's the patterns and the routines you fall into with that.
Work became harder for a lot of people. It became double the work.
Yeah.
So although you're at home and you've got that luxury of being able to cook, let's say, fresh food and stuff, but you like your workload, well, anyway, for me, it definitely increased. And everyone I spoke to, it's increased.
Yeah.
So it wasn't as easy as that.
And that really was, for me, that really was a sedentary lifestyle, right? Going out of a classroom full of kids and suddenly you were sat in front of a screen, and you'd eat out of boredom. So by the time January rolled around, it sort of felt like a time I could make changes. I had the time and the space and the control to make changes, but I also just needed to do it.
Yeah, and you've what is it, a total, you said a stone, is it now?
It's a good stone, yeah. It's probably more, actually.
I wish I could have obviously I can't throw up a picture of what you used to. I might, when James edits this, I might ask him to throw up a picture at this point of what the difference, because it's very good for people to see the difference of where someone was to where they are now, but understand that what changes they've gone through, because and not necessarily like that they've changed one meal or had a post-workout meal or had a protein shake, but actually like the things that they've had to adopt within their lifestyle to have that progression.
Yeah, I said this to Sue. She was asking. I said, well, to be honest, in teaching, I probably have to keep my before and after muscle shots off the internet for my own dignity. But I can see it in the mirror. I can see it in my face, and I think I can see it in more normal photos, and it's stark.
It is amazing,
and I can't really believe. It's hard to believe now that I was actually. It's hard to believe now that I was carrying that around all the time.
Yeah, and just through timings, we haven't obviously seen each other for a while. And when I saw you today, I was like, wow, that's pretty intense weight loss. That's massive. But the good thing is, it's been over a duration of time, as in it's been consistent. Not I'm going to do it for X amount of time, go back to it, stop.
Yeah,
It's been pretty fluid.
And I think that the nice thing about that for me is it's not. It was quite a difficult thing for me to get out of the mindset of really focusing on weight loss.
Yeah.
Which was what I was probably overly focused on. And really it's been about different things for me. It's probably been about changing some fundamentals of how I eat and when I eat and why I eat.
Well, I'm glad that you said that, because that's what we, obviously going through the challenge, they're the things that we try to educate through, as opposed to chasing that I have to hit a certain figure, a certain number. It's those reasons why I'm eating this, what am I eating, and not focusing so much on the end result. So those habits, would you say that's right?
Yeah.
Going through it?
Yeah. Yeah.
What did you learn from it? People could take this as a sales plug, but I want people to understand what you've changed and how you've now understood food to help it work for you.
Yeah, probably a couple of things. The habit stuff is really important. So I think before I've tried to lose weight before, and chasing weight loss, you can get very
Stop?
Yeah, well, where does it stop? And actually, what routes do you take to get there, and how drastic are they? And then if they're unsustainable as routes to get there, then you're going to pile the weight back on anyway, because you're going to revert to what you're doing before as soon as you've done it. I think that the big thing for me, that the thing I learned from it was really about planning.
You did mention this before.
So not about, before, what I probably do is maybe I just skip breakfast, crack into work, eat a massive lunch, work all through the afternoon to the evening, have a massive dinner, and actually then I sort of became a victim to what I had in the house, how hungry I was, and would just eat whatever was there, and would become very functional to fuel myself for the next thing with work or whatever. And actually planning, thinking really intentionally about how I want to eat and what I want to eat over the course of the week and why, and having then in what I wanted to eat and when I wanted to eat it, and thinking about some of the principles that probably underpin that around. And in some ways, it was really about eating more, not eating less. Which sounds ridiculous, doesn't it?
People won't believe until they do it.
Yeah, I really struggled. I was very skeptical about that. But actually, it was about eating more in planned and conscious ways, and then not snacking, because I'm a really bad one for snacking.
Well, is there anything, because obviously the things in that 30-day challenge was to teach you like the fundamentals and basics of learning how to eat properly. Was there anything that you had barriers with through, not necessarily just through that, but just in general, like what were your, you said that planning has really helped you, but was it also, what other things popped up that you really struggled with? Was there anything particular that you thought, I'm not sure?
Well, there were things I knew I was going to struggle with. Like I snacking is just like a huge pleasure, but like I'm talking, eat the biggest bag of crisps you can possibly find over the course of doing a piece of work that would otherwise take like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
That would be my hobby in that sense, especially in the lockdown when it's just boring.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people eat just purely because they are bored.
Yeah. So I think regulating those things was super difficult, but actually there were loads of ways that probably happened with that. I think like sort of thinking about the quantities of things that I needed to eat. So like upping my protein and that being a way of actually feeling less hungry was quite an interesting one. I think I struggled probably with the amounts of fats that I needed to have in my diet as well. Probably thinking a bit more basically, I need to avoid as much fat as possible, right? So I think for me it was thinking just even things like the composition of a plate had to change a little bit. And that was challenging in terms of actually looking at what I was going to buy in a shop. It was quite a different experience.
Well, like even kind of the education system with regards to like the eat well plate, that is, for me anyway, that is so outdated of how people should, what you said about putting your plate together. It's very outdated on how a plate should be made. I think there's like bread. I think bread cereal is encouraged. I mean, I'm not saying bread's bad for you, good quantities of bread, but cereal, very sugary. Tell you to fill half your plate with fruit, half your plate with veg, half obviously quarters now, quarters with fruit, quarters with veg, quarter with bread, cereal, whatever it might be, and then it'd be your fish, chicken, meat, which I have to obviously disagree with, because there are better ways to eat, and that's something that was encouraged. Like, I think that was made, I don't know, maybe like in the early 80s or early 90s, and that's still, as far as I'm aware, it's still being taught today of part of a balanced diet.
I just think there's a massive gap as well, isn't there? I mean, there's a lot of research in the space, and you go online, you're going to find 15 different ways to do it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like received wisdom,
and the thing is people can do every single one of those 15 ways and still have the result that they want.
Yeah.
Out of those 15, which ones are going to give you longevity? Which ones will be the best ones for you? Possibly only two, possibly only one. But it's interesting to know, and like in the flesh, that you've gone from changing those habits to understanding that there was an issue, you had to fix something, going through that day-to-day process, learning more about it, and actually now being able to implement that in your day-to-day. How easy is it now for you to implement?
Yeah, pretty easy. I mean, I think it was. I was quite nervous when that whatever lockdown it was, the millionth lockdown, when that finished and I had to go back to a full school timetable, and I thought, am I going to be able to sustain this? But actually, it's a lot easier than it was. And also what I find as well is I don't always sustain it. I'm not massively consistent with it all the time, but I know how to manage and adjust for that. And I know I think there's also a big thing in knowing what I've actually had, right? There's knowing what I've eaten, even knowing what I've not been consistent with, right?
Yeah, because I think people underestimate how hard they've worked out, and they overestimate, or the other way around. They underestimate how much they've eaten and overestimate how many calories they burned or how they worked out. Yeah. Which is also another thing it's very interesting. But
there's also a philosophy thing here that not to get too philosophical about, but there's the known unknowns and there's the unknowns, right? I mean, the unknown unknowns rather. And like sometimes I think for me, I didn't really know. I wouldn't even have been conscious that I was eating badly or eating well, right? And actually just having a consciousness of how you've been eating and how that fits into what you're going to eat in the rest of the day is actually massively important.
More. The amount of people that I've met day to day and say that, I eat healthy, and I'm asking them to describe what they eat to me, and I'm like, do you really believe that is healthy? When they as they're saying it, they're like, I realise that this isn't actually as healthy as I think. It just goes down to the education thing, and that's why we wanted to do it. But one thing I do want to bring up is, and obviously answer this honestly, is did you find that did you find that you had freedom to make choices that you wanted to make, or where people, in my eyes, people associate with, let's say, diets or changing foods is very restrictive. Did you find, or have you found it's been very restrictive, or do you find that you actually have freedom to manage things the way that you want to?
Yeah, I feel pretty free to manage it how I want to be honest. In terms of what I eat. Yeah.
Because I think people associate, I've got to change the way I eat. It's got to be restrictive. I can only have one chip out of the whole bag. Or, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, because there's a sort of. I mean, for me, there's a bit of a careful balance to be struck with it as well, which is that I don't want to always be thinking about what I'm eating. Sometimes I want to go, out to a restaurant, pick anything off the menu, and not worry about it. And I think for me that the important thing about what I hadn't really thought about planning and control and planning in particular is that it makes all that so much easier because you don't end up basically making bad choices all the time. Or not bad choices, but you basically get to balance how you eat across the whole week. So it's a lot. If anything, it makes that a lot easier and more enjoyable because I just would feel healthier, And that was a sort of freedom that I hadn't really thought about the idea of actually that you kind of can eat what you want, but it's not about not eating what you. For me, it wasn't about not eating what I wanted to eat. It was about actually eating the way across a week in a way that was nice and healthy and sustainable and made me feel good, right?
Yeah.
So I was actually always eating what I wanted, but I was just making sure that if not in a meal, in a day or a few days or a week or a fortnight, the way I ate actually resembled something that was healthy and nice. And I think actually having more knowledge in that sense gives you more freedom because I definitely felt then like I had more control over what I was eating and more choice because I basically planned it.
Yeah, well, you know the why, you know the how. So,
yeah.
Okay, and then what's the plans for you? What's your goals for the next 6 to 12 months? What did you want out of the world of life?
Well, I thought I'd start with I mean, I thought you were going to ask me about training first, but as in that sense,
go with training.
I was trying to think goals rest of my life. To be honest, I can work down in terms of. I mean, probably in all of them actually, I would just really. So in terms of training, I just like to train for a year uninterrupted. I'd like to really have a year of uninterrupted training. I sort of joined this time last year. So I've been a member for a year, and I've had some really good blocks, and I can sort of feel myself progressing. And then had sort of sequential lockdowns that have sort of just taken the wind out of my sails a little bit.
It's a very key word that you've said a few times. Been as in like uninterrupted, because I actually I don't think people realise how hard it is to have a training cycle for 12 months uninterrupted, which is quite interesting that you brought that up because you said about the education stuff as well. So that's a very good goal to set.
Yeah, and I think probably that if I was working that up into my wider life as well, I think there's a lot of things that it would be nice to have a full yeah, it would be nice to have a full year, educational year as well.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that will now happen from September for the next 12 months, right?
Yeah. So hopefully a full year in that sense, full year with various charitable projects as well. And I think just to have a full year's run at everything, a full tilt at stuff would be amazing. We can't really ask for much more than that, can we?
Nice. Matt, we've run out of time for today. Thank you so much for your time. Very interested to hear your story. Guys and girls, thank you, and we'll join you next week.